What's up, everybody? My name is Scott Paddock, and today we are going to talk about proper hand position on the saxophone. In the comments of my last video, I got a message from Herv asking me if I could do a video on hand position. He was experiencing some thumb pain, some hand pain from practicing. He's practicing a lot, about 3 or 4 hours a day, but he was experiencing some pain and wanted me to do a video related to hand position on the saxophone. And that was actually already on my list of videos to do, so I just bumped it up to the front of the list. So thanks, Herv, for putting that comment out there, and hopefully this video will help you. We're going to talk about a couple different aspects of hand position. The first is obviously having your hand in a proper position so that you are not causing pain. Obviously, that's the most important part. You don't want to cause pain when you're playing the saxophone, and carpal tunnel, which is dealing with your wrist and your thumbs, is a real issue when it comes to playing pretty much any instrument. And then the second part of the conversation is going to be about finger position to play cleaner, smoother, and faster. So let's start off with our hand position. What I have my students do is make a C. So make a C with your hand. Keep your wrist straight, flat, straight, so they're not bent at all, and put it on the saxophone. That is your proper hand position. Let me stand up and get a little closer to the camera. So you're going to make a C with your hand. So a C. Then you're going to put it on your saxophone, and you're going to keep your wrist really straight. You don't want any curves in the wrist. When you get curves in the wrist, that is when you get wrist problems. That's when you get pain. That's when you get carpal tunnel. And I speak from experience. When I was in college, I played like this. My hand was out and my wrist was up like this, and I would have terrible pain, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And after about 3 or 4 years, I realized that when I got my hand straight like this, I no longer had the pain. So if you are playing like this on either hand, it's harder. It's easier to do it on your left hand just because coming up like this, especially if you have big hands, you're gonna come up above. But you want to have your wrist perfectly flat. And obviously you want that on your bottom hand too, which is a little bit easier because of the way that hand comes into the saxophone. But you don't want it curved out at all. You do not want any angles in your wrist. If you do, you're going to have major problems. So that can relate in wrist problems, thumb problems, your fingers can hurt, you can get tingliness in your fingers, any of that kind of stuff. If you have a bend in your wrist, especially if you're practicing more than like a half an hour a day, you are asking for hand and wrist problems. So make sure that your wrist is flat, flat meaning straight, not curved. As far as your fingers, we want them to be curved like this. Think of them as like little hammers. We don't want them flat. So if you have your fingers flat, get your fingers flat like this one time and try to move them fast. They don't move fast at all when they're like that. However, when you make the C, you do this, it's really easy to move them fast because you have 1, 2, 3 joints that you're working with. When you're doing it this way, you only have this joint. So you want to have a C and have that on your saxophone keys like this. Do it this way. Yep. So you want it to be like this. Now, again, you don't want your wrist up high. You want to come in it from the correct angle so that you don't have any bends or turns. And then you want your hand to be a C. And obviously that goes for both hands. You want a C. So put your C's on there. Now, I record myself playing saxophone all the time because I do these videos, I do Instagram videos, I do YouTube tutorials, I do all kinds of stuff where I am recorded, and I see my right hand going flat a lot, and I try to correct it. So it happens to everyone. You just want to like make sure that you have that C. It's going to really help your playing. It's going to make you be able to play faster and cleaner. If you're playing like this, you're not really going to get any finger pain or wrist or thumb pain, but it's going to slow you down. So the wrist causes all of the medical stuff, but the fingers, if they're not in the right position, that's going to slow you way down. Another aspect of hand position that I'd like to talk about is where should your fingers be when you're playing. Obviously, your fingers are going to come up some, but you want your resting position to be on the keys. You don't want your hands out here. You want to be playing a C like this with your finger out here because it's just going to slow you down. It's an awkward position too, but more than anything else, it's going to really slow you down. So obviously, when you're playing and you're jamming out, your fingers might get a little bit bigger and a little bit more out of control. But as much as possible, you want to keep them close to the keys. And that also includes your G sharp key. Your pinky should be resting on this key all the time. It should never be up here. And I have students who sometimes have it back here. I have no idea why it would be back here, but that is a fairly common thing. You want it to be resting on this key guard. And same with your right hand. You want your right pinky to be resting on your E flat key. And if you look at my E flat key, let's see if I go in focus, you can definitely see some wear and tear right there. The lacquer is coming off where I keep my pinky on my E flat key. The rest of the key looks totally fine, but right there is where my pinky is, because that's where I rest it all the time. Now, another thing to think about when you are trying to play fast and clean. Oftentimes, as saxophone players, we think about pushing the keys down. That's how we make the sound. That's how we change the note. But when your fingers are flopping all over the place, oftentimes I have my students try to think more about pulling the keys up. So instead of like pushing them down with force, pull them up. It's a more gentle movement, because a lot of students, a lot of saxophone players have a lot of tension in their hand when they're playing. And that's another way to slow you down a lot and also cause medical problems. When you have tension in your hand, so go ahead and like flex your wrist and finger muscles and try and move your fingers fast. It doesn't work at all. So if you have this death grip on your saxophone, you're going to be hurting your wrists and your hands and slowing yourself way down. So you want to keep it really, really smooth, really calm, shake it out, and move your fingers. It should be effortless. There should be no tension at all. So when you think about pulling your keys up instead of pushing them down, because you push them down, you actually just think about doing it harder. If you think about pulling them up, you're thinking in the opposite direction. So it's just a little mind game. Obviously, you're pushing down the keys, but if you think of it in the opposite direction, it's going to release a little bit of tension from your hands. So let's talk about tension in your hands. Tension in your hands is going to create all kinds of problems. Again, that's when you're death gripping your saxophone. Say you have a really hard passage coming up, and you're like, oh, I got to get this right, and you kind of squeeze a little bit harder. That is the natural reaction in your brain, but it is the worst thing you can do on the saxophone. The faster you're going to play, the more relaxed, the more like a noodle your hands need to be. The faster you're going to play, the less tension you have to have in them. Now let's talk about our octave key. This is something that I correct in students all of the time. When you're playing your octave key, your thumb should be resting on it all the time. So your thumb should be here, and you're just pushing this down. Again, if you look at my saxophone, you can see that's where my thumb rests all the time. That's why all the lacquer is gone there. And the lacquer is totally fine here because I hardly ever touch there. My thumb is there all the time. Now, what I see students do a lot is they do this. They physically take their thumb off the rest and push the key. That is so much extra movement that it's just going to slow you down. Again, that's not really going to mess up your hands too much as far as like a medical thing, but it's going to seriously slow you down when you're trying to play fast. So you want to keep your thumb right on the rest, on the thumb rest, and then part of your thumb on the octave key, and just push it down like that. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. If you now understand the proper hand position on the saxophone, I'd really appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. If you have any questions or have any topics that you'd like me to cover in future videos, please leave me a comment below. Thanks a lot.